Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. How is collaboration technology shaping the client experience? My name is Melissa Weir, Huddle's marketing manager, and I'll be your host for today. Before we get started, let's review a few housekeeping items. This presentation is being recorded and all lines are on mute. We'll save some time at the end of the session and open it up for Q&A. To ask a question, type your message into the Questions tab in the GoToWebinar console at any time during the presentation. Today, we're very excited to have with us Tim Deluca-Smith, Huddle's Vice President of Marketing. I'll now turn it over to Tim for him to further introduce himself. Take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Melissa, and welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking about collaboration technology, and in particular how it can start to shape the client experience. So if you work in a business where the success of that business demands on client success and client outcomes, then hopefully this will be a fascinating webinar for you, and we're really excited to launch some new research data during this session. So hopefully it'll be exciting. Do please ask any questions, as Melissa said, in the chat window, and we'll answer those at the end. So just before we dive in to some of that data, some of that research that we've conducted, let me just give you a quick 30 seconds about Huddle for those of you that may not be familiar with us. We were founded about 10 years ago. We were an early pioneer and are now a global leader in the market for cloud collaboration. While this webinar is intended for the enterprise and professional services and client services organizations, actually a large part of our business is with government and public sector. Somewhere in the region of 80% of UK central government are Huddle users, and the same in the US, where we were the first cloud collaboration vendor to actually be given approval to work with federal agencies. Now, the reason I mention that is, as you can imagine, the amount of investment that has to go in to securing a solution like this, to put all the privacy and data protection around the service is immense. And what that's done is to actually give us a bit of a halo effect out into the enterprise with organizations and industries, regulated industries, that also really value the strength of that security. And one that's really spiked over the last couple of years for us is accountancy organizations, consulting organizations, as I say, those types of regulated industries where the protection of data is critically important. So today we work with somewhere in the region of, I think about 60% of the top 10 global accounting and consulting agencies around the world. Now, if you're not actually familiar with the concept of cloud collaboration, let me make it really simple for you. I want you to just think about how you work today. It doesn't matter what type of project it may be. Maybe it's an audit, or it's a consulting project for a client, maybe a tax engagement, whatever it may be. There's probably 4 very distinct steps that you run through. Step 1, you have to gather a lot of information. Now, typically that documentation and data comes from various stakeholders, maybe the client themselves, or even internally from different teams or departments, or even different offices within your network. You then need to start building a working team around that data to actually work on the project. And again, those team members may not be physically located with you. They may be dispersed across the office. They may be sat on the other side of the country from you, but you all need to get together and to work on the documents. Thirdly, you need to be able to share that documentation in a controlled manner, shared with multiple different stakeholders, maybe the client themselves or the client's third-party advisors, and you need to be able to control how that information is shared and protected. And finally, you have to close down the project. You may have to archive it, keep it for data retention policies, and deliver it back to the client. Now, start to think about all the different tools and applications you have to use to get that work done, and you start to see some of the inefficiencies and productivity fails that may occur. Now, Huddle and tools like Huddle, one place in the cloud that makes it very, very easy for teams and clients to come together and to work on projects, to share ideas, share and edit files, manage tasks, track activity, all in one secure shared environment. So it becomes very simple to search for documentation and knowledge across the business, to manage tasks, to co-author and to collaborate on content, to have conversations around that content, to manage approvals and do so in a way that's auditable, trackable and highly secure. So that's a very brief couple of minutes just to explain who we are and where we sit in the industry. But the really exciting part of this webinar, as we said, is to talk about how technology like ours is really starting to shape the client experience. And I'm sure you've wondered the same thing. We're all thrown a number of different tools. We read about new technologies that are designed to make my life easier, but actually, does it make my life easier and does it improve how I engage with a client? We wanted to find out just as much as you, so we actually commissioned an independent study this year. We spoke to several hundred accounting, consulting and professional services firms across both the US and the United Kingdom to actually ask what their challenges were and what tools they were using. On a positive note, investments are being made. This is a very progressive industry. Technology investments are being made in new productivity tools, new client engagement tools. But still today, we find that professionals do still find it too hard to collaborate internally with their teams and with each other, and most importantly, externally with clients. And what we found was a failure to really balance the needs for very robust security with the ease of use that business users demand. And that's created new and, as we saw, very often unforeseen problems. And when we actually asked why business was lost, why clients are lost, you can actually root cause about 70% of the reasons back to poor collaboration, an inability to communicate effectively both internally, to share work internally, and to do that with the client. And just to show you, to give you some examples of excuse me, why this was such a striking observation that we found. Again, if you asked those organizations, those industry professionals, why they won business, when they were pursuing new business and they went into that meeting and you asked them, well, what actually sets you apart as an organization? What helps you to win new business? Obviously, it's things like competitive fees, it's things like security, but there's a lot more softer value statements that are being pushed out. An ability to demonstrate expertise, an ability to show a wider breadth of services to meet those client demands, and more importantly, an ability to be transparent in our relationship with a client. So that was interesting because actually then we asked why clients were lost. And you start to see some very similar themes. Clients are being lost because organizations fail to understand issues. They fail to be transparent. They fail to demonstrate that expertise. So something's happening in between the expectation that we're setting with clients and our ability to actually deliver on that expectation. And that's what we wanted to discover. That's what the research report, and there'll be links at the end of this webinar so you can download a complimentary copy of the full data set and the report. We really wanted to understand where that disconnect actually was. So let's start at the beginning. New business pursuits. It's the lifeblood of any organization. To grow, you need to win. So we really wanted to understand actually what the impact of winning new business actually was. Now, I don't need to tell anybody on this call that winning new business doesn't come easily, and more importantly, it doesn't come cheaply. Actually, we found that there was roughly 84 hours of senior management time committed to every new business pursuit. The average cost of bidding for new business is now over $25,000. Time's a very precious commodity for organizations such as you. So dedicating time to pursue new business, you have to be sure that you're well positioned to actually win it. And when you actually start to drill down and ask these organizations, well, why does it cost so much? Some very interesting themes and trends come out. People find it very difficult to collect the necessary information from across their business, to connect to different subject matter experts internally who can help them respond effectively and accurately to a bid. There's some very basic issues with productivity. Workflows and responsibilities between multiple different stakeholders on a bid team are unclear. People are wasting time working on multiple document versions. I would imagine most people on this webinar have probably experienced that, where you've spent time working on a document only to find out the next day that Bob at the desk next to you has also been working on it and has got a more up-to-date version of it. So all of these very, very obvious and basic productivity fails are really impacting organizations' ability to be productive and efficient in that bid process. But there's a wider problem with this, especially when we think about collecting information and connecting to subject matter experts internally, because we often say that knowledge is at the heart of any business. It's a fundamentally important asset. And I'm sure this will resonate with most of you, that knowledge is very easily siloed. It sits in silos across your organization, or it's put at risk, or do you know what? It's lost altogether. We asked those same respondents in the survey where they stored work documents, and a huge percentage of them store work documents in places that just isn't accessible by the rest of the business. They keep them on their desktop, on their C drive. They perhaps use a personal file sharing app like Box or Dropbox. Or commonly, and I'm sure we've all done it, they leave them as attachments in email. And then what happens when those individuals leave the business? Those email accounts get deleted, their C drives get wiped, or their personal file sharing accounts get taken with them. And that knowledge and that documentation has been lost forever. And it's also put at risk by perhaps using less secure sharing methods. And people are only doing this because they want the flexibility to work. They know they need that document and they need to take it with them as they travel to a client site. Perhaps they're passing through an airport and they need accessibility to that document. So people aren't doing this maliciously, they're just trying to get their work done. But it's tools like Huddle that actually help to overcome some of these barriers. And we actually have Huddle clients in the accounting space that have gone on record and said they've actually seen a 30% reduction in the time taken to respond to bids. That's about $8,000 per bid, and you start to think about how many bids are being pushed out, that value really starts to stack up. So then after that, we wanted to say, well, okay, you've won that piece of business. We've all cracked open the champagne, we're having a great time. It's now time to service the client. How do we do that, and what technology do we have in place? Now, when we spoke to organizations about how they actually start engaging, do you remember in one of the earlier slides we spoke about gathering information and building teams around that content? And when we spoke to people, by and large, the majority said, yeah, do you know what, collaborative portals where we can start to share information freely and communicate with clients, that's a really great idea, and that's probably the best way to start sharing insights, exchanging ideas and exchanging documents. But the reality is very different. The old habits really die hard. People are still using email attachments, getting into version issues. People are still using those personal file sharing apps. People are using unencrypted USB flash drives that really start to put risk around sensitive client data. And as I said before, so many people waste time. How many of us have worked on out-of-date document versions? So these old habits really start to die hard. The promise of technology is perhaps not living up to the expectations of the clients, but also the employees that are actually using these tools. Another great example is searching for documents. You probably don't keep a stopwatch on your desk and actually time how long it takes you to find an individual document to work on. But trust us when we tell you it is far too long. Again, when we spoke to the industry professionals, we started to look and monitor how many documents they were using per day, how long it took them to find them, where they were being stored. And it's actually quite frightening when you rack up all of the numbers. You know, it's over 1.5 minutes spent just to find a document because the name's changed. You forgot where you saved it. You email that you know it's in a folder somewhere, but you can't quite remember it. And when you actually multiply that time by the number of documents that are being worked on each day, the money starts to rack up. $4,000 per employee in lost productivity just searching for documentation to get your work done. Now, many of you on the call will probably be saying, well, do you know what? Actually, we have some tools that help us get around some of these challenges. We've invested time and money into collaboration portals, client portals, or collaboration platforms. One of the most common ones is Microsoft SharePoint. A huge percentage of organizations that we surveyed, somewhere in the region of 75%, had some kind of SharePoint deployment within their business already. It's a very traditional collaboration platform that's been with us for many, many years. The problem is it's not actually used. And as I said earlier, there's always a bit of a snag between the requirements of the business to provide a robust, secure container and platform, and the requirements of users who want something that's easy to use, that looks great, and something they can present and use in front of their clients. So actually, when you talk to SharePoint users who say we do have a SharePoint instance available to us, and ask them, well, do you actually use it? Only 35% of them regularly do. The majority are still using legacy tools. 46%, nearly half, are not using SharePoint at all. They're using unencrypted USB drives to share files with colleagues, teams, and clients. All those personal file sharing apps appear once again. Now, if that resonates with you and you have a SharePoint instance and you perhaps don't use it, hopefully these results will also be familiar to you. Why don't you use SharePoint? It's a piece of technology that's been invested in by your business. Theoretically, it should meet most of your demands. So what's the issue? Well, it's this usability issue that comes up time and time again. Perhaps the clients don't know how to use it because we haven't invested in training for employees to train the clients. It perhaps takes too long for IT to provision clients. I have to put a help desk ticket in. Maybe in a week, my client will be given access to our collaborative space. The rest of my team don't use it. Said, you know what, I'm not going to use it either. I'll find a more common tool to share with. Perhaps it doesn't look professional. If you want a collaborative client portal, you want to be able to brand it with the client's brand. You want them to feel familiar. You want it to be a window into the brand of your own organization, and perhaps the SharePoint instance doesn't do that for you. And then, of course, the common thing that we always hear is tools like that are just too complicated for us to use. The next thing we wanted to look at was mobility. Just how mobile are you? When you really think about mobility, remember we spoke earlier about people start to go to the lowest common denominator of grabbing a USB flash drive from their briefcase or using a personal file sharing app, not because they're trying to purposely circumvent an IT policy, but because they want to get work done. They know they've got a long commute home on the train, they're perhaps taking a flight to a client site, they know they need access to a document, and that's just the easiest way of doing it. Well, shouldn't we be able to work effectively on a mobile device? When you actually talk to people about what they're doing on their mobile devices, while 93% admit they have a mobile device for work, really they're just using it for email. Anything more than that can be challenging. So what's happened to that promise of mobility, where we would be untethered from our desks, where we would have access to documents, to tasks, to conversations, regardless of our geographical location or regardless of the device we're using? Can you, when you're out and about, outside of just sharing things on email, access the latest documents from your mobile device, perhaps as you're, again, passing through an airport? Can you access those documents? Can you approve those documents? Can you keep up with the conversation? These are some of the mobility challenges that we found time and time again, not only in the US, but across UK organizations as well. So these are some of the barriers that come up over and over again that tools like Huddle and collaborative platforms that offer native mobile apps, so you have a very seamless experience as you hop between different geographies and locations, that just make you more productive on the move. So when you're looking at these types of tools for your organizations, or you're perhaps engaging with IT to scope out a new platform, start to think about your workflow, start to think about the documents that you do need access to as you travel. How important is it for you not to delay approvals, to not be the bottleneck that means that your team misses a deadline, and to not just be reliant on basic vanilla email. So we stepped through some of the workflows and technologies for winning business. We've done the same for managing and servicing client accounts, but what about actually retaining business? How effective are we as an industry in using technology at keeping our clients satisfied, happy, engaged, and retaining that business for another year? Tools like Huddle really start to drive a more collaborative business, because one of the fundamental questions that we asked industry professionals was, do you know what? Just tell me what would make your life easier? What would make your job easier to do? And when you read some of the answers, you have to wonder, are we really in 2016 here? Removing duplication of effort, better document version control, clearer approval processes, clearer collection of client documents. It takes time, it takes effort. We're supposed to be in 2016, and yet somehow the enterprise tools that we're given still frustrate us. And when you actually drill down into these, a lot of these root cause to really poor collaborative technologies that exist within the business. How are we as enterprises managing the knowledge that exists and making it accessible and surfaceable to different teams around us? How are we communicating with clients? How are we managing tasks? How are we keeping audit trails to make sure that there is no duplication of effort? And I think most importantly, when you start to think of those frustrations, is to acknowledge and accept that these aren't just frustrations that exist internally, because your frustrations are also your clients' frustrations. They will also feel the pain. They'll also feel the pain of missed deadlines or poor performance or inaccurate documentation coming out of the project team. If you start to look at why client deadlines are missed, again, clients are changing project requirements, internal approvals are taking too long, client approvals are taking too long, because do you know what? I don't know where they are. I have no ability to track if they've actually downloaded and used and read and approved a particular document. I've got 20 people that are part of this project, and do you know what? It just takes too long to consolidate feedback and manage versions. I'm missing deadlines. And this really impacts our ability to retain and keep clients happy. So looking at some of those common issues, you really start to have to question some of the enterprise technology tools that are in place. We're still very reliant on technologies that are many decades old, and they're still causing some very familiar problems. We may not consciously think about our lack of productivity and how that impacts the client experience, but it's there. We may not think about the lack of productivity and efficiency and how it impacts employee satisfaction. Are the tools that I put in my business satisfactory enough to keep my employees motivated and happy and to keep them within my organization? And there really does exist this chasm between how firms are positioning themselves for success, trying to add value by showing breadth and transparency and collaboration with clients, and their ability to deliver on this promise. So it's tools like cloud collaboration, and particularly Huddle, that start to close this chasm and start to put better collaboration at the heart of your business. Tools like Huddle, because they're cloud-based, mean that they're available from wherever you are. Securely, secure containers where your teams can come together to co-edit, to collaborate on content, to have secure conversations, to build branded client portals where documents can not only just be delivered securely to the client, you have an audit trail so you understand, are they actually using it, have they downloaded it, but where clients can have secure conversations back with the project team for full transparency. So that's very much a highlight of some of our new research. We would dearly like you to download, have a look at the research report for yourself. It's available from that link. Everybody that's on the webinar, we will push out a link to you all after this so you can download your free complimentary copy. As I said at the top of this webinar, we work with a large number of professional services firms spanning accountancy, advisory services, investment banking, consulting firms globally. We have a wealth of expertise to help you start building collaboration into your business. And it's not just about technology. Some of the issues that we spoke around SharePoint, it may functionally and technically be a great solution, but is it usable? Do you have the support infrastructure around it? At Huddle, we have a global customer success team that can actually come in, understand your business challenges, map your workflows into the system so that you really start to hit the ground running and you can deliver a fantastic client experience from day one. Obviously, webinars like this are very difficult to really show you the tools, so we would invite anybody that's interested to contact us. We'd be delighted to run a personal demo to yourself or anyone else in your team, or you can get started with your own free trial at huddle.com. So that's the end of today's webinar. I think we've had some questions come through on the chat.
Great, thanks so much.
Melissa's collecting. Yep.
Yes, really appreciate you sharing some of those insights from the recent research. We do have a few questions coming in. Feel free to continue to add into the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. But let's go ahead and get started with one of the first ones we have. How do you at Huddle address concerns over the security in the cloud internally?
Yeah, so I think one of the, I mean, it's a great question because it's such a common question. I think I don't think we've had one client engagement where the issue of security hasn't come up. I think there are a couple of things to consider here. Firstly, that cloud computing has come a long way in the last 10 years. Governments in both the United States and my homeland here in the UK both have cloud-first policies in place. They understand the benefits not just from a financial and cost perspective, but also for mobility and availability of content and data for their users. As I said at the top of the webinar, different vendors are different. You know, you have to look at the security policies and regulations that they sign up to. We put an awful lot of investment into securing our data centers, but it's not just that robustness of security and encryption that I think businesses need to be worried about. It's also around permissions, right? How do you ensure that that piece of content doesn't get into the wrong hands, or you can perhaps revoke rights to access to a piece of content or a sensitive document very, very quickly. When you think about security and you look at what are you really worried about, it does tend to come to, well, that document may leave my organization. I may not have control over it anymore. But that can happen anyway. Just look at the amount of people, as we found, that are using USB drives that fall out and get left on a bus seat or somewhere else, or email, which is notoriously troublesome. I'm sure we've all sent an email to the wrong person in our address book before. So often it comes down less about the sort of pure hard encryption of data, although of course that's important. It's about user training and permissions management and how users are actually using the system. The weakest link is always, unfortunately, the user. So that's what you have to train around, help people to understand that they don't have to use poorly encrypted or personal file sharing apps anymore. The business is investing in a much more robust technology, and let's get you all on board with that today.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate that. Looks like we have time for one more question, and this one touches on something you spoke about earlier about circumventing current tools. So this question is, our employees are circumventing current tools. Wouldn't they just circumvent Huddle as well? And how would you address that?
Yeah, so there's always a risk of technology overload. Once was the day where we'd come to the office and we would probably have access to our email client and basic Microsoft Word and Office applications, and that was it. Now we probably have a multitude of applications on our desktop, task management tools, project management tools, time tracking tools that we have to dip in and out of. So it's very easy for employees to become fatigued with technology. They really have to understand the benefits, and that's where things like training and mentoring really come in. You can't just hurl a piece of technology over the fence and hope it's going to stick and you're going to get 100% user adoption. You have to work at it, and you have to work at it over several months. You have to onboard your employees. You have to show them the benefits of the technology, how things like mobile apps are going to improve their mobility, are going to make their lives easier. You remember the slide that we touched on that talked about common frustrations. I'm sure there's not one employee in the world that wouldn't want to get rid of some of those frustrations. So if we can put technology in front of them that meets those needs, they are going to adopt it. But as I say, it's working with customer success teams to come in to help them to understand what workflows exist. Technology is not a silver bullet to everybody's pains, and you have to understand where you're going to get the most value from it.
Great. Thank you so much for addressing those questions, Tim. And anyone else who's entered questions into the console will be sure to follow up with you after the webinar individually. You will receive a recording of today's presentation, as well as a complimentary download of the full report that we have generated recently. Thank you so much, Tim, for sharing these insights and presentation. And we thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you have a good rest of your evening or afternoon. Thanks so much.